Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to Go Figure Customs YouTube channel. Coming to you from the deck of the USS Flag today, again, as usual, with my latest custom, Range Viper. Range Vipers are a particular favorite of mine to customize, but I'm not going to tell you how to make a Range Viper today. I'm going to show you how to make unfortunately, this is probably not the best way to show you. I'll stick some still pictures in here somewhere, especially him. How to make more realistic, how to do a paint job, more realistic paint job on your weapons. Now, remember, this is not the way to do it. It's a way to do it. There's any number of ways to do any painting techniques for your customizing figures. The way I do it doesn't make it right. The way I do it doesn't make it wrong. It's just the way I do it. And I get good results that I'm happy with. So I thought I'd share because it's a fairly easy technique. It is a bit time consuming, however. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our weapon and, of course, as usual, use primer. Primer the weapon, let the primer dry. Once the primer is dry, we're going to do a base coat. Now, if you've watched my other videos on the painting tutorials, you know my techniques are to paint, do a wash, and then do a dry brush in that order. So I do a base coat in a medium color, do a wash in a darker color, and then I do a dry brush in a lighter color. We're going to mix those up today a little bit. So for the base coat, try Sea Blue from Tamiya. The number on that is XF17. I know a lot of people are not very fond of Tamiya paints. They're very thick, they dry very quickly, they look like melted crayons if you're not careful with it. The best way to use Tamiya paint is to stir it using a battery-operated paint stirrer. Badger makes a good one. You can get them for about $12 from your local hobby store, and I think even Amazon has them. Mix it with get a little palette. I like to use the action figure stand. I have my figure on while I'm customizing. Put some paint on there, mix it with a little water to thin it out, and paint a base coat over your entire weapon. One of the things I like to use is a little pair of tweezers to hold it someplace, usually right at the handle, because remember, your figure is going to be holding the weapon probably most of the time. So if you don't get all the paint right where the figure's holding the weapon, nobody's going to notice except maybe you. Or I'll also get it like by the trigger guard sometimes. So do a base coat with the Sea Blue, let it dry. The best way to do the base coat, honestly, is with an airbrush. Tamiya paints run fantastic through an airbrush. It's more of an advanced technique. I say advanced, but it's not really that difficult. You hit it with an airbrush until you get a coat, and that's it. When I use an airbrush, I put 4 drops of airbrush. Ooh, let me see what it's called. Hang on a sec. All right, so if you're going to do this with an airbrush, I use 4 drops of airbrush flow improver and 4 drops of thinner, usually with any paint. Sometimes it makes it a little too thin, but this is a good recipe to start with. And I'm using an Iwata Neo airbrush, which is about the cheapest one you can get. So you can either do it by hand, thin the paint out, do multiple light coats until you've got an even base coat of your Sea Blue, or you can airbrush it. That actually saves a lot of time and puts on a much smoother coat as well. Once your Sea Blue is finished, now we're going to dry brush. Instead of wash, we're going to do the dry brush first. Normally, I've recommended in the past using the really crappy Testors brushes. For the finer dry brushing, I have actually started using the War Games. Actually, it's the Army Painter. It's the Army Painter. It's a new brand of paints that I've recently discovered, which I kind of like and I kind of don't. They have some They go really good through an airbrush. They're a little thick to paint unless you water them down a little bit. But that aside, they make their own brushes, and this is a what's this called? Small dry brush. This is a small dry brush, and I mentioned in my painting tutorial that it's good for putting down just base coats, but it actually also does do really well for dry brushing. So what we're going to do is we're going to dry brush on Citadel paints, a base paint, and it's Iron Warriors, yes. So that's the Iron Warriors. That's the second one, and we're going to dry brush the whole thing. So that's where you want to use the tweezers, because you don't want to miss somewhere where that's going to be visible. So the whole thing, even the handle, and then both sides, and get the whole thing. This is normally, I've mentioned previously that you don't want to overdo it with the dry brush, but this is one of those times where if you overdo dry brushing, it's not really going to be a problem, because we're going to knock it down with the wash. Once your dry brushing is dry, then we're going to do our wash, and we're going to use the Nolan Oil, again by Citadel Paints. And I do one side at a time. And this is another one where you can't use too much. Dip it in there and paint the whole thing. Set it down, let it completely dry. If you have a lot of wash on there, it does take a while for that thick, where it glops up in like pools, it takes a while for that to dry. Let it completely dry, flip it over, and do the other side. That is all there is to it. With that simple technique, you'll get some results that look like this. Here's a picture of, hopefully I'm getting this right, this is a picture of the M4 that I'm doing for my female Range Viper. And then here's some pictures of the Range Viper himself that I shot yesterday, because when I finished him, I used the same technique on these guns here. And you can see that it gives a nice realistic finish to your weapons. It's an easy technique that's it's a little time consuming, I will give you that. But you know, if you start doing the weapon, you know, usually the weapon's like the last thing I do, and on the figure, and by the time I'm working on the weapon, I almost just don't care anymore, because I just want this figure to be done, because I've been working on it for so long. So start working on the weapon while you're in the middle of the custom. You know, if you're painting your guy and you need some paint to dry, now it's time to work on the gun. Put your base coat on there, let that dry, go back to your figure. When you're waiting for paint to dry on your figure, do your dry brushing, let that dry, go back to your figure. Once you're waiting for him to dry, then slop on some wash on one side, let that dry, work on your figure a little bit, hit that other side, and there you go. Very simple, not too complex of a technique, but it's a very simple technique to give you a more realistic finish on your guns. Hope you found that interesting and useful, hopefully. If you got any questions, hit me up in the comments, and share, like, subscribe, all that fun social media stuff. And thanks for watching. Tune in next time.